indoctrinate the children with white ways of being. So nothing indigenous children did that was indigenous would be allowed in the schools, and there would be pretty severe punishments if any children violated those expectations. But it was also a time to indoctrinate the youth with patriotism towards the United States government instead of their individual or their indigenous nations, the nations from which they came. And so this is a picture from the Sherman Indian School in Riverside, California, part of the patriotic pageant. And so when you see the kids dressed up and forced to participate in pageants like this, it wasn't about creating patriotism for their nations. It was about creating patriotism and loyalty to the United States government. In fact, one of the very first uses of the Pledge of Allegiance was in boarding schools, so that indigenous children had to recite out loud their oath of loyalty to the United States government, to the colonial government that was responsible for stealing their land, killing their people, perpetrating genocide, ethnic cleansing against them, and to teach them simultaneous hatred of their own people, of their own culture. Another aspect of this was indoctrination in Christianity. It was against the rules for indigenous children to pray or to practice any sort of religious freedom in the boarding schools. They had to pray to a Christian God in Christian ways, and if they didn't, they were punished severely. They were tortured, and many were killed. Dr. Ting Tinker has written about the high death rates in the boarding schools. Generally, 1 in 2 of the children who attended the schools died as a result from overwork, malnourishment, from heartbreak, from cold, from exposure, any number of things. He says the death rates among children confined in such facilities was, after all, as high or higher than that prevailing in some of the Nazis' more notorious concentration camps. This was so not for a single decade, as in the camps like Dachau or Buchenwald, but for 4 decades, or 5. Those in charge, both north of the border and south, meaning Canada and the United States, determined not only such a toll to be acceptable, but steadily increased the rate at which Native youngsters were fed into the death mills. In the contemporary context today, if you read the UN Genocide Convention, Article 2 talks about genocide. One of the criteria for genocide is the forcible removal of children from one group to another. The United States practices this on a routine basis for decades against indigenous children. And you might think, why would they do that? Why was it so important for the United States government to go after the children? Why was it so important to eradicate indigenous culture? Well, this is a quote from Harriet Mahaney, who's a survival of the Alberni Residential School in British Columbia, because the Canadians had their own form. They call it residential schools, same circumstances. And she talks about the purpose of the residential boarding schools. She says, "We were the keepers of the land. That is the special job given to our people by the Creator. And the whites wanted the land, the trees, and the fish. So they had to brainwash us to forget that we had to guard and preserve the land for the Creator. That's why they put us in the residential schools and terrorized us. So we forget our language and our laws and allow the land to be stolen." And it worked. The whites have 99% of the land now, and our people are dying off. That's why it's never been about God or civilizing us. It's always been about the land. So if you take children, educate them for a decade, keep them away from their culture and their families, keep them away from access to their homelands, you indoctrinate them with Christianity, with American patriotism. When they come out of that system, what would they be fighting for? This was a way to systematically, effectively, successfully wipe out indigenous resistance to colonization. Because Americans wanted our land and wanted our resources. And they would do whatever it took to achieve those ends. So, in the Minnesota context, Minnesotans wanted access to the lands to engage in extensive mining, manufacturing, access to timber, energy production, industrial agriculture, animal feedlots, you name it. All of this has been absolutely devastating to the Minnesota homeland. So today, in the Minnesota context, 90% of the wetlands have been destroyed. 98% of the big woods of southern Minnesota are gone. 98% of Minnesota's white pines are gone. 99% of the prairies are gone. Farmers continue to dump about 90 million pounds of pesticides on soybean crops every year and another 50 million pounds on corn crops. In southern Minnesota, in this area, they've inserted so much drain tile into the earth, they've actually changed the entire hydrology of southern Minnesota. Companies like Monsanto continue to patent life, genetically modify seeds, including their Terminator seeds, threatening even our traditional corn planting within our homeland. Meanwhile, coal-burning nuclear power plants continue to toxify our lands and waters, creating sick people, sick animals, and sick plants. Many of the rivers in Minnesota are now so polluted you cannot even swim in them, let alone drink the water or eat the fish, at least not without risking your health. This society, in the last 150 years, has created unprecedented devastation and destruction to this land. This is why the Dakota population needed to be dealt with, so that Minnesotans would have access to the land for exploitation. And it's been extraordinarily successful. Dakota people still today in the 21st century do not have access to our land base. Prior to invasion by any group of people, Dakota people had roughly 54 million acres in what is now Minnesota. Now, today in the 21st century, after policies of genocide and ethnic cleansing, we have about 7,000 acres. And I would say more than half of that is because we bought back land that was stolen from us in the first place. Today our land base is about 12 thousandths of 1% of our original land base. And I don't think that represents justice by anyone's standards. So if we think about this, we think about education and the role that that has played in the United States context, particularly in relation to indigenous people. I think it's pretty clear it's a colonial education. And so the antidote to colonization is decolonization. And when I talk about decolonization, I mean the intelligent, calculated, and active resistance to the forces of colonialism that perpetuate the subjugation and exploitation of our minds, bodies, and lands. It is engaged for the ultimate purpose of overturning the colonial structure and realizing indigenous liberation. That's what decolonization looks like from my perspective. Now let me ask you, in this context, can the United States educational system decolonize? Can it become uncolonial? What do you think? Yes?
I would say that it would probably be really difficult because we don't have, all we know is the stories that white people put into the book, all the everything that they thought was history, where we don't have all the people's stories. Like we would have to search really, really hard to find, enough people to tell us their stories, and we get an accurate look at how